blending tutorial, we're going to be blending the Oceana Girls. This blend is a little bit more complicated than your traditional blend just because of the straps, and we got lots of curves, there's lots of things going on. This is more of an intermediate sew. Don't be afraid of this blend. It looks a little scary at first, but honestly, once you figure out exactly what you need to do and what lines you need to make, it's pretty simple, especially if you're used to blending things. So for today, we're going to try to do a crazy blend. Some of you may not have a child that's quite this all over the place. Some of you might. But this is what we're going to be doing. A chest of a 6, a waist of a 5, a hip of a 7, a height of an 8. Now I have sized down these pattern pieces to actually fit on a normal piece of paper. Obviously your pattern pieces are going to be much larger than this. This just helps with the video to be able to get everything all in one shot so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So I've got my pattern pieces. I've got my materials together. So you need your pattern pieces. You need something to write with. You need a French curve. This one is vintage, so it probably looks a little bit different than what you might traditionally buy in the store right now. If you don't have a French curve, you can wing it. However, a French curve is definitely makes your life a little easier. And then you also need a straight edge ruler. I prefer normally something a little smaller than this, but we have recently moved and this is what I could find. So we're gonna go with this. So go ahead, take your measurements, record the sizes that your child falls into or your model falls into, and let's get started. So you'll notice on some of these that you may not need all of the sizes. For example, on the pants or the skirt, if you decide to do the skirt option, you don't need the chest because obviously this is for the bottom half of a person, bottom half of the garment. So there's no need to have to use the chest on this. This is only going to be for your waist, hip, and height. Same as when you look at the bodice. Oh, here's the skirt. If you look at the bodice or the bib, you don't need the hip because obviously the bib doesn't hit the hip. So let's start with the easiest part of the blending, which is going to be the bottom. Move this out of the way. We're going to come back to these pants pieces. Now this is going to be the same thing whether you're doing the shorts, you're doing the ankle pants, you're doing the knee shorts, any of that, it's all going to be the same. So let's start with, we have our front pattern piece here, we have our back pattern piece. Let's start with the front, or I'm sorry, with the back, because it's a little bit easy. We don't have any kind of pockets or anything like that. So we're going to start with this. Now we have the waist of a 5, a hip of 7, and a height of an 8. So your hip markings are actually here at your notches. So this would be the hip, this would be the hip. And they should be completely balanced straight across. So I'm going to just show you right here where our hip marking is. Now your waist is going to be here at the top. So we'll put a W there for waist. So these are the two things that you're trying to blend together. So if you have the hip of a 7, it's going to be right here, and you have the waist of a 5, that's going to be right here. Now, theoretically, you would want to just connect these two dots. However, you also have this height of an 8. So we actually want to bring this up. So in order to do that, we're going to draw a line from this waist 5 to a height of an 8. And then you can also bring this over here. You want to make sure everything is nice and even. Where these 2 points intersect is going to be where you're going to want to draw your new line. So you have our hip line here, hip of a 7. We have our waist and height of an 8. And you notice how these hip lines all basically are the same. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna draw a new line from this nice point here to our hip of a 7. Now, you want to make sure this, at this hip mark, you want to make sure that this is nice and blended. Sometimes you might have kind of a point, and so what you want to do is if you have that, you just want to kind of shave that off and make sure this is nice and even. Now you can do that with your French curve. This French curve obviously is meant for full-size pattern pieces, so I'm not going to actually use it too much for this tutorial. But you could use that French curve to just make sure that's nice and smooth, or you can do it manually. It's not an exact science. You just kind of wing it. So here, now we also have this hip here and we have the waist here. So we're going to do the same thing, right? Because we need to bring this waist up. You can use your paper to make sure everything is square. So we're going to make sure that this to here, to this 7, is going to connect. Now again, you should be using your French curve to make sure that that's nice and curved, even. It's not quite right, but it's pretty close. Again, you want to make sure that this is a fluid curve. It goes all the way into the 7 marking. Now, the other thing that you need to make sure on this is that these points right here are right angles. That needs to be a right angle. So if you need to kind of smooth this out a little bit to bring it in, then you need to make sure and do that. Now we're looking at a right angle for this line, which a good way you can do that is if you have a ruler like this that has, you know, kind of a curve, or not a curve, I'm sorry, if you have a ruler like this that has the lines, then you can make sure that that's squared off. Now the reason for that is, and you will notice if you've ever had a pattern that you bought from someone that hasn't been trued, you don't want to sew these points together, this back crotch together or the side seam together, and have it come to a point, either a point out or a point in. So you want to make sure that that's trued off in your blending. It's very, very easy to do, not a big deal, but you definitely, that's something you want to focus on. Now, the other thing that you need to do, so we've blended this hip, we've blended the waist, so the top part of this is going to be perfect. You would continue this line all the way here on your hip marking, so that would still be a 7, and then you would continue it all the way down. Generally, the hip does go ahead and correspond with the rest of the leg, unless your little one happens to have a skinnier or larger leg than what the standard is. Now, if they do, these notches here, there's a notch, 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 those are knee markings. So these are knee markings. So you can change this a little bit. You notice there's not a huge variable here. However, if you do need to let some ease in or out, you can use those markings accordingly. But the other thing that I want to make sure we do is we have this height, right? We have this height of 8. So if we have a hip of 7, but a height of 8, we need to make sure and extend this, otherwise it's going to be too short. So very easy to do. You would just extend this line down, which really, this is pretty close. It's going to be a lot different. Remember that my pattern has been shrunk, so you're going to have more of a gap there than I am. But you just want to extend that down to the 8. Don't go out to the 8. Make sure you keep the width, but extend it down. What we're going to do is we're going to take this side seam and we're going to copy it, because when we sew this together, we want to make sure that this line here matches on our front piece, right? We don't want to have it be longer or different kind of shape or anything like that. So we're going to cheat, and we're going to take this one and we're going to copy it. There we go. You already have that side blended. That'll give you that side, it'll give you everything. The other thing we need to do is if you're doing a pocket on here, do the pocket for the height. So in this instance, it's gonna be the 8. That's gonna be the 8. So this is gonna be the height. And use that line there. That'll make sure that your pocket opening is big enough and it's not too big or too short or anything like that. Again, this needs to be a right angle, but you should already have that if you're following this line. Now, let's focus on the crotch here for the front pant. Now, again, here's your hip line, right? From these notches. So there's your hip line, here's your waist, and we also need to do the height. So we're gonna use the same principle that we did before. We're gonna bring this line up. We're gonna bring this one over. And then there we go, there's our new line. So we have our 7 marking here for our hip. We have our new line there. We're gonna have a nice straight line from that waist to hip. We're gonna mark that off. And again, you're gonna do the same thing. You don't want this to come to any kind of point. So you wanna make sure that it's nice and blended in and nice, smooth line there. And again, you're gonna use your 7 marking for there. So now you have your hip of the 7, your waist and height of the 5 and the 8, and that should be done. You would do the same kind of thing here at the bottom with bringing this down. Bringing it down. Again, yours will be a little bit different than mine. Now, the next thing we need to worry about are the pockets. Now, we used this height line here. You're gonna do the same thing here. So you're gonna use your height of your 8. You can go ahead and use the width here if you would like of your hip, but it's basically, if you notice, they're basically all the same. So we're not gonna worry about the pocket too much because it's a pocket. So if it's a little bit wider, a little bit shorter, a little bit taller, it's not really gonna matter unless you're doing the micro shorts, and even then, this grading amount is not very much to make that much of a difference. So the other thing you wanna do is, again, copy this line. Copy this line. So if you copy it from these side seams, and you know everything's gonna match perfectly, which is exactly what we want when we're sewing. So since we've gone and done the pants, let's go ahead and do the skirt. So let's say instead of doing pants, you did the skirt. So let's go ahead and do that. With a skirt, you're not gonna need the chest measurement. And actually, unlike the pants you needed the hip. With the skirt, because this is a circle skirt, you don't need this hip marking. Circle skirts have a lot of ease here at the hip. Even if you had a really extreme hourglass figure, you're gonna have plenty of ease there. So the skirt is super easy to blend. We're gonna use this waist of a 5, height of an 8. So here is gonna be your waist marking. There it is there it is there. And then here is gonna be your height marking. So you're gonna go all the way to the 8, all the way to the 8. You're gonna continue that around, continue this around, and you've already got your piece blended. So super easy. Here, because if we were gonna use this height, you notice how that would make the pocket much longer. So we're gonna do the opposite of the pants. We're gonna use this waist marking and have it end a little bit higher. So that way we know that we have plenty of room, that it's not gonna be too big, not gonna be too small. So you would just copy this line to here if you were using the pocket. Same thing here too as far as grading. You're gonna use that 5. You're gonna use that waist, 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 length, height. And there you go. Super easy blend on the skirt. Very easy. Now, here's where things start to get a little bit tricky. Now we're moving on to the bib. Because of all of these curves, there's lots of lines going on here. It seems a little confusing at first. It might be a little daunting. Take your time. You can do it. So let's start with the easiest part of this blend, and that's going to be the waist. We want to make sure that our bib matches our pants or our skirt. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna blend that waist. Now for this, we got the waist of a 5, we've got the height of an 8. So those two are gonna be combined. We don't need to worry about the hip because that was taken care of with the pants. So we're gonna take this 5 marking here, right here at this edge, and we're gonna bring it down. Let's make sure it's nice and square. Bring it all the way down to where it intersects with this 8, right here. Now, with blending these two lines, we need to match this waist of a 5 with the chest of a 6. The easiest way to do this is gonna be where this 5 and this 6 intersect. See how all the lines start to kind of go on top of each other? Where this 5 and the 6 intersect, I want you to mark that point. That is gonna be the point you're going to blend into because that's the point that it changes from going from the chest to the waist. And it's gonna be different depending on what your blend is, wherever those intersect, but that's always gonna be the point that is gonna give you the best, easy, fluid line. Because that's what we want. We don't want any jagged edges. We want a nice, pretty line between the chest and the waist. So you're gonna mark from this point to this point with your French curve. And then you're gonna continue this up into this chest marking. You see how that's a nice, pretty line? You wouldn't even be able to tell if you saw the pattern piece by itself that it had been blended. You're gonna continue this on for the height. So now you've just extended the bodice and you've made it more narrow. Same principle if you were putting the bodice higher and making it wider. Same kind of principle. You just wanna see where those lines intersect. It's basically like connect the dots. So if you're doing the patch pocket, you will also need to record this marking here. So this, I've printed out the height, waist, chest, so that's 8, 5, 6. We're looking for the 6, so it's gonna be this middle one. If you're like me and you only have a black and white printer and you're like, whoa, I can't see this, just print out that chest marking so you can just get that marking. It just basically lets you know exactly where your patch pocket's supposed to go. Now, the other thing which I just forgot that we need to do is there's also notches here for the waist. So we need to take that waist marking and continue it down, which hopefully you can use your ruler better than I can. But you just wanna make this down here. So that is your new notch. These notches are super, super important because this lets you know exactly how you need to line up this piece when you align it to the back, because this particular pattern has an overlap on the sides and on the back. So you need to know where that overlap is, and if you don't know that, then your pieces aren't gonna match your skirt or your pants. So next thing we're gonna do is the hardest part of this bodice, and that's gonna be the strap. So the strap is a little bit complicated. It can be a little confusing at first, but I do think you can do it. Basically, we're gonna wanna look at our points here. So we have our height markings here for our 8. So we wanna do our height, and then we also wanna do our width. So basically what we're doing is we're taking this pedal and we're shifting it up and we're moving it over. So let's mark our markings for our height first. We want our pedal, the bottom part of our pedal, to start right here at this 8 marking. And we want the top part of our pedal to be right here at this tip of the 8. So this 6 is gonna have to come up to that. So let's look at our bottom markings for our 6 on the strap. Bring it up. Bring it up. And then our center marking here for the strap. And you do want to make sure that you keep everything nice and square. Okay, so where these points intersect, these 3 points, 1, 2, 3, is going to form the basis of the pedal. Now, in order to know how wide that pedal needs to come out, you can either just wing it, make it whatever size you want, or if you want to be technically correct, you need to mark the edges of this pedal, which would be there. And if I can get it straight, here. Now, if you measure this and mark the middle point of that, that will give you a new point of reference, which to blend to. So basically, again, it's connect the dots. We have these 3 main dots. We have our side edges of our petal. Now you can use your French curve here and curve them. Because my French curve is super big, it's made for a big person's body, not this little bitty tiny one. I'm going to just freehand it. But you just want to make sure that's nice and curved like a petal. Now, you can take this and find this middle marking and cut it in half so that way you get a nice even petal on both sides. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'm not going to do that. However, I do think it's a good idea if you decide to do that. So you have a nice even petal. So this right here is the hardest part of blending the entire pattern. So if you can do this, you got it. Everything else should be much easier. Now we want to go ahead and use these lines for the chest of the 6. Continue those down so you have your strap widths. The only other thing that we need to do besides meeting these 2 lines together, which is just continuing onto the 6, is this neckline. Because of the height, if you were to go down to a 6, it's going to be super low, which this is an overall, so technically you have something underneath it. If it is super low, you know, it's not the end of the world. However, let's keep our proportions nice and pretty. So we're going to use this height marking of the 8 and just marry it with a 6 and just blend it. So then you have that whole piece done. Let's go ahead and switch to the pocket real quick just because it's right here. These patch pockets are super, super easy to blend because of the fact that we're just looking for the chest and the length. So you can just take this line and extend it down. So the 6 goes down to the 8. Again, the 6 goes down to the 8. Super, super easy, and that'll keep your proportions perfect. So now we've done the front bib. Let's do the back bib. We have this front bib piece. We want to make sure and keep it because we're going to steal some of the information from here. Again, let's start with the waist because that's a little bit easier. It's not as intimidating as those straps. And you're going to basically do the same exact thing. When everything's square, we're going to bring this waist marking down. Actually, let me use our green so I stay consistent. Waist marking down. Again. Waist marking down. We're going to bring down our notches. Now for this center back, this is going to be the same because they're all in a line. But for this side seam, it's going to be different. So we want to bring it down and mark our new notch there. And again, for this side seam, where this chest and the waist intersect, is going to be a point. So that's going to be your easiest place to get a really nice, pretty blend. And then you just continue onto that chest marking, or chest line. So again, too, this notch here, you're going to use the chest for it. This notch is just to show you where the side seam is. You don't actually have to line it up with anything other than your, it is helpful when sewing your lining and your main together, so you know that everything lines up properly, but it's just to show you that this is actually the side seam and not the center back. Center back is over here. So again, you're going to do the same kind of thing, except for with this, you notice that these lines don't actually intersect. So we're just going to finagle it until we get a nice pretty marking. And it's down there. So again, center back, chest. So we have that done. Now, again, we're getting back to this strap, right? Now we're getting to the strap. Now, because we've already done this once, let's not recreate the wheel. We just need to figure out where exactly this thing's gonna go. So we're gonna do a few basic lines. Here's our height. Here's our chest. So from this point, I want you to just copy this over because these two pieces have to match. So you might as well just take this and copy it. So cut it out, trace it over there. Now you got your new piece. You just continue this on the 6th marking or the chest marking all the way down to these newly blended points, and then you're done. So if you can do this bib, you are like a master blender. And really, it looks really complicated. The hardest part is definitely this strap because it's all these curves, but really, it's not that bad. Especially if you have any kind of experience with blending before. This is an intermediate sew, but I definitely think you can do it, and it'll make such a huge difference with your fit. And if we're gonna spend all of the time doing sewing, you know, garments, take a little while to make, so we might as well make it as perfect as possible. So that's it.